Good evening. Welcome to Your Kingdom Come. We're going to talk something a little different than what we've done before. I know we've covered who was Jesus and Paul, then we covered a Psalm, and then we covered Ecclesiastes. But this is going to be a little different. This is going to be titled Let's Get Spiritual from a biblical perspective. And I want to talk spiritual things, and I'm hoping that even believer or unbeliever can grasp this concept because I think it'll be life-changing if you can understand this. So I first want to start off with a short clip, and I want you to see the parallel in what I'm going to be saying here shortly. But I'm going to start off this. This is from Poltergeist 2, and I'll play it now.
I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk with your family out of the way. Because I believe you have a problem here.
Yeah?
Yeah. I believe there's an Indian living here with you.
Taylor.
Well, that's what he calls himself now. You are in danger.
What do you mean?
I'm with an organization whose concern is families like your own, families in crisis that are preyed upon by charlatans with fake magic and false solutions. Now, I don't expect you to believe me now, but let me come in and talk to you about it.
This is just crazy. This is nuts.
Please, open your heart and your mind to what I'm saying. He is Hades. Strong hold on this family. Who do your wife and children turn to with their problems? They turn to him. Now don't they? They don't trust you anymore. What you fear is that you're not man enough to hold this family together.
How do you know?
Because I'm smart. And I'm your friend. And I know what you are thinking. Now, let me in. And let's talk about it. Let me in. Let me in.
All right, that's what I wanted to really point out. As you can see, I'm going to make a parallel because a lot of movies, even though they may be what you would call secular or they may be graphic or whatever, if you have spiritual eyes to see, you can actually almost look at that stuff and be talked to in your spirit, that you can understand things. What that man was trying to do was use mind manipulation with that gentleman behind the door. And what did he keep saying at the end? Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. So I want you to understand something. I'm going to take both sides of the scriptures. So I'm going to work in both. I'm going to work in what you call the Old Covenant, Old Testament, and then you call the New Testament, the New Covenant. And I want to show you how this parallels what that gentleman was talking about. It was a little long, but bear with me. We're going to get something good out of this. I really believe that. So when you see, and I'll go right here, when you see those different enemies of Israel in the Old Testament, now if you just, God is deeper, our God, our Creator is deeper than just a storybook, a history book. If you're reading it through fleshly eyes, you can't grasp what I'm about to show you. But you'll see here that one of the instructions that God had given the children of Israel, which in turn were his chosen people, which I would hope we are as true believers, and unbelievers, I'd hope you come into the camp of Israel. You can understand that it's almost like code word. What I mean by Israel being God's chosen children in covenant, you can say he was doing that back then. He's doing the same today. Then you see when you hear Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, these enemies of Israel represent spirits. And if you can understand this from a spiritual perspective, I can show you how they do in the words in the Hebrew, because Hebrew is a spiritual language, whether you know that or not. So if you look at the Hittites, this name means terror back in its original context. What is that? That is, they were giants who brought fear, confusion, and discouragement to others. Come on, you can see this. I want you to have spiritual eyes to see this. God had given his children a direct decree to take these people out. Now, it's the people, but it's also the spirit behind it. So the Hittites represent the spirit of terror, the spirit of fear, the spirit of confusion, and the spirit of discouragement. We'll keep going. The Girgashites, these were people who were back, who would go back and are earthly. So this spirit was to take you out of connection with your creator, the God of Israel, and bring you back into earthly world, have you fall into things and do all these things that you would go against the will of your creator. Now you have the Amorites. What were they? They were arrogant, boastful in speech, always challenging, had high self-esteem and pride. You see these spirits behind these enemies of Israel. The Canaanites, merchants who humiliate financial gains. This is the spirit of greed, the spirit of commercialism. These are spirits behind these that God has instructed us to take out. The Torah, the instructions in the beginning of the book still apply to us today. You just have to get the spiritual extraction out of it so you can fight this spiritual battle. Like I said, this is all about getting spiritual tonight. You look at the Perizzites. They had no discipline and restrictions. They wanted nothing to do with God's commandments. They lacked self-control. You see the spirits behind these enemies of Israel, these enemies of God's children. There's a spirit behind. The spirit doesn't die. So the spirit that was in the Perizzites is the same spirit that's in today. That's why this Bible is different than all other books. Then you look at the Hivites. They wanted a good lifestyle. They were people who wanted to be carefree, luxurious life. Do you see the spirit here? Do you get the spirit? I'm hoping I'm conveying something very important. And watch how this is all going to come together at the end. Then you see the Jebusites. These people were they would exploit and pollute. They would go in immoral activities. You see the immorality. We're about to hit that really hard. And I'm going to show you something very profound in the scriptures in a minute. But this was immorality, one of the big spirits, one of these tough ones that all men and women really have to face, these giants of immorality. This is who God has asked us to wage war with. I had a person tell me that the Torah, the instructions of God, is not valid today because these instructions to take these people out, well, these people are no longer here. So sad, you're missing the spirit. You're thinking the physical, I'm here speaking spiritual. We got to take these spirits out as believers of God and believers of the God of Israel. If you're a true believer, this should be your mission, to expose these spirits and allow others to arm themselves to know what these spirits look like and how they sound. You are taking these spirits out. That's why the Torah, the instructions of God, are spiritual. Now, if we get rid of that, I'm going to show you something about with sexual immorality. So Paul's writing to the church of Corinthians. In the one teaching I had covered, I had talked about who is Jesus, who is Paul. I explained a little bit about Corinth. It was a port city, very, very, very pagan, very wicked, totally rebellious. Well, they had came to faith through Paul doing his preaching with a couple other brothers with him. And then he went on his journey and then got letters that they were all in disarray. And he comes back in a letter and tells them, and what he tells them here is powerful. He says, flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Now, I want you to understand from a spiritual perspective. I'm going to show you how many scriptures it talks about when a man and woman unite, they become echad in the Hebrew, which is they become one. Yes, they're two separate entities in flesh, but they become one. When that insertion happens, they now become one spirit, and they now open themselves, like in the beginning when I showed you that poltergeist where he said, aren't you going to let me in? Well, a lot of people don't realize that when you lay down with a woman or you lay down with a man, you're inviting those spirits. You're committing sins within the body. And that is why you see look at how many scriptures you have: Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:5, Mark 10:8, Ephesians 5:31. You have the same thing. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become echad, one flesh. That echad in Hebrew is so important because it's a plurality to a singular. And that is how you can explain, when people don't know how to explain who Jesus was, that in spirit he was echad with the Father. In spirit they were one. I hope that helps you understand that concept from a spiritual perspective. So when you also look at this, I want you to see when he talks about when you sin against your own body, I want you to see something more profound. Look at the next one. This is the next verse in 1 Corinthians 6, now 19. Do you not know that your bodies are the temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. So now I ask you, if you are going out and you are the temple of God, you are a pure vessel to be used by God, for God's Spirit to dwell in, then how can you become echad, one with a spirit outside of the Father, outside of our Creator, outside of what is allowed in the temple? There's no pollution and uncleanness in the temple. And I can give you multiple examples of people, one main, Aaron's two sons, who stepped out of bounds in the temple and were destroyed. So I want to come on here. I want to give you something very important when it comes to spiritual warfare, that when you read these scriptures, you have to see them with a set of spiritual eyes. Yes, there's a physical that is applicable, like applies, but also there's a spiritual side as well. So I hope you can see that. I wanted to get on here, not be too long, but show you the spirit of the enemy and multiple enemies, and even the spirit that lives within yourself, because all of us have some of the serpent's venom in them. They call it sin nature, call it what you want, but it is that spirit of sin, that lust for sin we have, can become echad, united with the spirits of the Jebusites, the Hittites, the Canaanites, or i.e. the spirit of lust, pornography, greed, pride, fear, anger. So I wanted to expose these spirits tonight, that you can understand the battle that goes on in the scriptures and how our Creator is trying to equip us through his word, the understanding to how we can fight spiritual war. Because one of the scriptures that I'll quote from that is very important, and I'll show you here, is when you see we wrestle against flesh and blood, not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. So in Ephesians 6:2, you'll see here, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood. You can't think fleshly. This isn't a battle physical, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So I want to end on that note. And like I close out, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord be gracious upon you. In the name of the mighty, great Creator, peace.